Everyone has a story, but not everyone gets to tell it. Life gets busy. We talk, we text, but do we listen? Are you looking for real stories, raw and unchanged? Want to experience life through another's eyes, one story at a time? Daniel and Jenny have you covered. It's time to start the conversations, and that's the #truth.
Today's guest is Susan May. Susan's love affair with books began when she made a bad grade in math in the 6th grade. Not allowed to watch TV until she brought the grade up, Susan filled her time with books. She turned her love of reading into a love of writing. Writing as Susan Carlisle, she has completed more than 30 books for HarperCollins' Harlequin imprint medical line. Her heroes are strong, vibrant men and the women that challenge them. She also writes nonfiction. Her book, Nick's New Heart, 30 Years and Counting, is about her son's heart transplant experience. Her second nonfiction is a historical biography called A World War II Flight Surgeon's Story, released under the author name S. Carlisle May. She lives in Cartersville, Georgia, with her husband of over 30 years. They have 4 children and 8 grandchildren. Susan loves castles, traveling, cross-stitching, and reads voraciously. Thank you so much for coming on with us. We've really been looking forward to talking with you.
Finally.
I know. Well, I had that opportunity to do an Instagram live with you for the Heart Community Collection. And I said, oh my gosh, Dan, I'm like, we got to get this woman on our show. She has such an incredible, not only story, but storytelling ability. I think I kind of was on the edge of my seat the whole time.
Well, thank you. That's sweet of you. That's sweet for you.
You're welcome. So you do have quite a story, which leads to, I guess, you writing a book about everything that went on. I'm going to let you jump in and just kind of give us a little bit of history about all that.
Okay. Well, the book part came pretty late in the picture, later than I intended it for it to. But having 4 kids and getting them raised seemed to take most of the time. But the book is Nick's New Heart, and it's about my son who was born with congenital heart disease. And he hit 32, almost 33 years ago. He'll have a birthday in April. And we had no idea that he was going to have a heart problem. That was the days before they did ultrasounds routinely. Mm-hmm. We would have had to have paid extra for an ultrasound, mm-hmm. and they were also kind of considered things, if you wanted to know what the sex of the baby was, and we didn't particularly want to know. We were happy with surprises. I will say he was supposed to be a girl, and so that we already had a boy. And we had a boy and a girl and another boy, and he was supposed to be a girl. I tell him that every once in a while. And but he appeared as a boy, and we had no idea he was going to have any problems. When he was about 12 hours old, the nurse came to me and told me that my pediatrician wanted to see me in the ICU. Or they had called and told me that Nick was having a little bit of breathing problems, and they just wanted to watch him a little closer, and they moved him into the neonatal ICU. Mm-hmm. And so the next day, my pediatrician came and said he wanted to see me, and I went in, and there's this big, healthy baby in with all these preemies, because he weighed he weighed 8 pounds and 8 ounces. Mm-hmm. And laying there, and my pediatrician said there's a problem with his heart, and that he's not getting oxygen to his fingers and his toes, and that's why we know that, and that he was going to send him to the Children's Hospital in Atlanta. And I had no concept of babies being born with heart problems. Heart problems were always been an old man's problem. Mm-hmm. And to be told that your little brand new baby has issues was quite a shock. Mm-hmm. And I was there by myself, and it was my fourth kid. If Nick had been born 3 weeks earlier, we would have 4 children under the age of 4. So my mother was watching my other children. My husband was at work. Those were also the days before you got 6 weeks off with a baby, you know. My Andy's days off were more like 6 hours. You know, my wife's having a baby today, you know, I'll be in this afternoon, you know, kind of thing. So I walked down the hospital hall all by myself. And I will say I stopped and cried, and because it was I mean, you know, there's just zero knowledge, and I'm not sure that every mother should be told all the things that could go wrong with their baby, you know. But still, it was we were we were blindsided by it.
Mhm.
So I called my husband, and he was at the hospital really quickly, like in 10 minutes. He sped. Let's just put it that way. And my mom and the we waited most of the day for the ambulance to come get Nick. He had to go by a neonatal ambulance, and they had another patient that was sicker than Nick, and which that was a good thing. But I got to stick my hands through the side of the neonatal unit box. It was a box that he was in before they took him, and touched his hand. But that's all that I had held him after his birth. And I do remember he was a little bit of a blue color, and more so than the other kids. But you know, he had all his fingers and toes. And I asked, I said, is he okay? And, you know, and the doctor responded, yeah, this is not unusual. We'll give him some oxygen and so forth. But when his pectus ductus closed up, which we all are born with, and that's when he started having problems.
Mhm.
And so anyway, he was sent by the ambulance. I didn't get to go. And any mother that sends their husband off with their brand new child, that's like, you know, you're not going to get any answers. I want to know what kind of expression the doctor had. How did he stand? What was did? And that I knew my husband well enough, even at that time, that I was not going to get that kind of information, and that disturbed me on a level also, you know.
Mhm.
So my husband and my in-laws went to what was then Eggleston Children's Hospital. It's Atlanta Children's Hospital now, but it's had 4 or 5 name changes in 30 years. And so they admitted Nick, and Andy called and said he was doing fine. They put him in they didn't have room for him in, well, that's not exactly right either. But they had 3 ICUs. So Nick went to the neonatal ICU because he couldn't go to the cardiac ICU because he hadn't had surgery yet.
Mhm.
So anyway, he was the biggest baby in the neonatal ICU. And I got out of the hospital the next day, and my mama drove me down, and we took the kids, you know, thinking, you know, this isn't going to be a big deal. It'll be fine.
Mhm.
And it turned out it was a far bigger deal than we expected it to be. And Andy took me aside and said, I need to talk to you, and pulled me aside. And he told me that Nick was going to have surgery, and that he had agreed to the surgery, and that we would, it would be, I'd be meeting the doctors that afternoon. And it ended up, my mom obviously took my other kids home. The oldest one had just turned 5, and he can remember that I was upset and that I was crying, but obviously he didn't know why.
Yeah.
And, you know, the kids were pretty happy because they were going to their grandparents' house, you know, so they were pretty good with that. But Nick had his first heart surgery when he was 5 days old, and Dr. Kurt Canner did his operation. He had a Norwood procedure, and that just changed the plumbing just enough so that his heart would function for a to get him started in his growth. And as you know, children that have heart patients, they have trouble growing and developing. And we fought those battles. I had before I could take him after he did fine through the Norwood procedure, and we were expecting to spend probably 6 weeks in the hospital, and we spent 2. So he did really well on that initial one. And but I couldn't leave the hospital until I learned to feed him through an NG tube. And my degree is in political science, and I think with that side of my brain had no desire ever to be a nurse. I'm really good with band-aids and that sort of stuff. But I learned really quickly to be a pretty fair cardiac nurse, and I could recognize things and I could do things. But I remember the nurse said, "You can't take him home until you can do this." And I told her to get out of the way and show me how to do it, because going home was always my motivation for everything. When do we go home? What does it take to go home? Because living in a hospital was not conducive to our life or any of my children's life. So I learned to put an NG tube in, and I can put an NG tube in leaning over the front seat of the car. I learned to,
Pull 'em out.
yeah, yeah, pull them out, do the whole 9 yards. I mean, I was good at it, and do it quickly, even, and probably could still to this day. And I haven't put one in for probably 28 years, but I would not. I learned then not to be intimidated by what I was told to do, if as long as it would get us home. And so Nick went home, and we did well, and he was fed through an NG tube, and had on medicines and stuff. And I was pretty congenial about the medicines until they wanted me to do something that required that it had to be in a refrigerator. That was off limits, because if it had to be in a refrigerator, then it was forgotten when I went to if we went out to my mom's house or something like that. So all medicines had to be something that were portable. And I had a really good pharmacist, and they crushed it up for us and made it portable. And then I learned to say, no, we're not taking medicine 16 times a day. You get it where it's twice a day, morning and night, and then I'm a participant. And so those were my two things that I kind of balked on and made sure they understand. No, that doesn't work with the lifestyle.
You're like,
so
you need to do better.
Yeah. And so Nick did really well. Went back in, to make a really short and a long story. He went back in when he was 3.5 months old. They realized, looked at it. His right pulmonary was too small. He went into surgery. Had this time they tried to go, instead of opening him up through the front through his sternum, to go underneath his arm and between his ribs. He didn't tolerate that well. Almost died on the operating room table. Flipped him over, opened up his sternum. So this time he was returned with a incision all the way from his neck to his belly, and also a big huge incision around his ribs, which meant that you couldn't hold him. You had to get his butt in the back of back of his neck. And
when you were waiting during that time for the surgery to be done, did they come back in the process and tell you, hey, we're going in the front now? Or
yes, they did. We knew that something had not gone well. They sent out a nurse, and she said, actually, on that surgery, I think Dr. Canner called me, called the waiting room, and told me himself that, that his blood pressure had gone down to nothing, and that they were going to have to flip him around. And and that usually a nurse came, but that time Dr. Canner did call. And Nick spent 6 weeks on a respirator in ICU. Um, he lost all of that developmental time,
Mm-hmm.
and not on he spent I think it was a month in a room by himself, and we could go in and see him. But after that amount of time, they kind of got skeptical of whether he would ever come off the respirator. They being everybody but me and Dr. Canner. Dr. Canner says he'll come off, and they put him out. They put him out into a room where the other patients were, and the lights were on all the time. So he lost his night and day. And by that time, my oldest one was starting kindergarten, and I thought, I need to be at home with him also. So I would drop Drew off at kindergarten, drive 2 hours to Atlanta. I get to visit 2 hours with Nick in ICU, and drive home for 2 hours and be there to pick up
Wow.
Drew from kindergarten. For 3 weeks, I did that. On the weekends, my husband and I would go down. But I felt like my mom said one time, you probably could go a day, without. I said no, because Nick needs to know that somebody wants him to come home,
Mm-hmm.
and needs to know that somebody is there. And I can still see those pitiful eyes to this day, and how sad they were. And I kind of wondered what few times if he knew who I was, but it didn't matter. He needed to know that he was loved. And he finally came around, came off the respirator, and came home. And we were back to the NG tube. And after I had worked so hard for us to get off of it, but this time he was fed at night through an NG tube all night long. And I got to feed him for 20 minutes with a bottle, and then the rest had to go down through his nose. And he slowly but surely got stronger and got stronger, and really, really rebound really well. And then at a year old, we went back in for just a routine visit, another heart cath, and they found the left pulmonary was too small, which obviously made me very nervous. And after you've been on a respirator for a long time, you tend to like the respirator.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a fear also. Uh, Nick went in, had his surgery, did very well, got off the respirator, and we were there for just a couple of weeks, and came home. So we rocked along really well, made our regular monthly visits, and Nick grew, and was talking, and really had pretty much bounced back on all of the things he had lost. And when he was just before he was a year or 2 years old, went back into another heart cath, and his surgery were always supposed to be a stage surgery anyway. You have the Norwood, and then you would have the Glen, was what we originally thought. We'd have the Glen around 2 years old. By the time Nick got to be 2, they had found out if they would do the Norwood and then the Glen, and then finish up with a Fontan, I think that was, or I can't remember that now. But anyway, it had gotten spread out, and 3 surgeries instead of 2, and that they would try to do them all around 2 years old, then he would be done.
Mm-hmm.
So we started looking at what would be the second surgery. And Dr. Kenner called. We were debating about what to do, and he was getting the test and different stuff. And he called one Saturday afternoon and said, are you sitting down? No, but I can be. And I had a seat, and picked up Nick in my laps, and he said, how do you feel about a heart transplant? I was totally blown away. We had always thought a heart transplant was a backup plan.
Mm-hmm.
If Nick lived to be 20, had a heart transplant, lived to be 40, And now that I'm much older than 40, I don't think 40 is all that old anymore.
This is true.
And we, parents get greedy, for time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but we thought, okay. And so it was always, always kind of there in the back of our minds, but certainly not when he was, 2 years old, or one. Actually, he was still one, and so we didn't know. So I asked Dr. Kenner to send it off to a cardiologist that I'd met, that Dr. Kenner respected, and I did too, that was now working in Boston. So he did. He sent the information, Nick's information. He said, yeah, you need to transplant. But then the issues of antibodies came up. If you've had a pregnancy or a lot of blood transfusions, you tend to develop antibodies. Well, Nick had a blood transfusion every other day in ICU, not to mention how many times he'd had surgery. I mean, I have no idea how many blood transfusions he's had. But so, the fear of there would be a high amount of antibodies was certainly there. So he had an antibodies test. And again, we waited for Dr. Kenner to call. And Dr. Kenner called and said Nick didn't have any antibodies. And which I thought was a miracle all by itself.
Yeah.
So I asked him again. We had been down also. My husband and I had been down to the hospital to talk to Dr. Kenner and Nick's regular cardiologist, and they wouldn't tell us what they thought we ought to do. Mm-hmm. There really wasn't a question the first surgery around, but they were leaving it up to us, and we didn't know what was the best thing to do. But I asked Dr. Kenner, I said, what do we need to do? And he said, I think you need to transplant. Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay, which my husband said, so you and Dr. Kenner decided to transplant. Is that it? You made the decision on the first surgery. Yeah. But I told him why, and he didn't disagree. But, he thought, well, I haven't been asked about that. So Nick was listed with the United Network for Organ Sharing, which everybody's listed on. And you're listed on your age and weight and whether or not you have antibodies and how close you are to death. And I did not know it until well after it, but they considered him within 6 months of death.
Oh my gosh.
To be like, yeah. Oh. And I thought that was knowledge well kept away from me at the time. And I think you even have to be sicker now in most cases. But and you have to, if you're a child, you have to get a heart from somebody that is 20 pounds. A heart that will fit in your chest cavity. So you can be a sickly little boy and get a heart from somebody who is healthy and older than you or younger, and your heart will grow to fit your body in time. An adult,
I read that, and because it's a question I had like a while back, like, what about a transplanted heart? What if you get it when you're younger? Does it grow? And it's really miraculous that it does.
It is.
Yeah, it goes through. But if you are an adult, you get a heart from somebody that's 20 pounds above or below you in weight. Mm-hmm. Because you think if it's I know a gentleman, he was like 6'5", 300 pounds. Mm-hmm. He is not going to be able to survive off of a heart from, say, a woman who is 25 pounds and 18 years old. So you've got to get that's very significant for adults because of that. But a child's is all based on their chest cavity size. So Nick waited 6 weeks. We had these are the days of a pager, y'all. That's how far I had to get a pager, and we couldn't go to my in-laws because if they lived in Alabama, but they didn't live an hour from us. But the pager didn't work in Alabama. You had to stay in Georgia. Yeah. So I would get paged every once in a while, and I didn't dare not answer the page because even if I didn't recognize it as Dr. Cantor's number,
Mm-hmm.
he still could be calling from another phone or whatever. So I would call people, and one of them was a painter. I called him and I had to ask him, and I said, "Now look, don't flip out here, but we're waiting on a heart transplant, and I wanted to make sure, you know, it's not, coming from this number." And he said, "No, no, no, no. He was a painter." He says, I'm shocked, but that only happened a couple of times. But we did have a call from Dr. Cantor about 3 weeks in. He told us for me not to feed Nick, and that there was a chance for a heart, and he would call me back and tell me, to come on to the hospital. And the hospital at this time, we had moved in the middle of Nick being born to the time of the transplant. So we were an hour closer to the hospital. And we didn't move for the hospital, we moved for a job, but that it worked our benefit. So he lots of hullabaloo, Andy leaving work, my mama coming and everything. Dr. Cantor calls back an hour later and says the heart's not good enough. And even up until the time Nick would have gone on the operating room table, if Nick had not, something had been wrong with the donated heart, or if something was wrong with Nick, they would have said it was a no-go. So we expected that. So Nick, 6 weeks in, Nick was outside playing in the yard. The kids were outside. Dr. Cantor called. Actually, he paged me, and he said, "There's a possibility of a heart. Stand by." And I said, "Look, I've been through this with you again. I got some flowers out here that have got to get in the ground. If I don't answer the phone right away, you page me again." He says, "All right, So by this time, we gotten to be really good friends. So he kind of expected that, but I thought I'm not getting everything in our world topsy-turvy and then him say this is a no-go. So I called my mama and put her on standby. I put Andy on standby. He didn't pay attention. He came on home. My mama stayed put. But anyway, we didn't hear from Dr. Cantor. I planted it all, finished planting my flowers, came in and got Nick and I bathed, because I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. And he called back, and Nick had been on an antibiotic and had recently been in the hospital, in fact, and was on an antibiotic. And I called to remind him of that. And while I was waiting, talking to the transplant coordinator, he was trying to call me, but because I was talking to her, who was talking to him, I didn't answer the phone. So then I finally got through talking to her, talked to him. Remember the days before with pagers and phones on the wall, and so hey, no call waiting or any of that sort of stuff. So anyway, he said, "Yeah, come on down," but it still may not be a go. So I took the kid. We took the kids to a friend's house. My mama came on to the hospital to see us, and Nick went in, and that evening at about 6 o'clock, and at midnight he got his new heart, and we got to see him the next morning about 7 o'clock, and he was a pretty pink child then.
It was only 6 hours?
No, from six at night till all the way in the morning.
Oh, okay.
I was like, wow.
Now, if Nick had never had heart surgery before, heart transplant's about 4 hour long.
Really?
For a heart surgery, yeah. Because they've never opened the sternum, they don't have to worry about scar tissue, and it's a really straightforward surgery. They actually only take the bottom part of the heart, where the vessels and all are, stay there. And they just suture big sutures and suture, the muscle part of the heart. In Nick's case, because his pulmonaries and his aorta were bad, they actually took all of those. So his was a more extensive surgery. So they had to attach, he got the full heart, and all of those vessels had to be stitched.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's the reason it took so long for that. So we saw him, and where he had been blue before, his fingertips and around his mouth especially, he was nice and pretty and pink. He looked like they put lipstick on him. It was a difference between daylight and dark.
It
It
is
was,
very
I mean,
strange to see your blue child that you're so used to seeing blue suddenly be pink. We had a
oh yeah,
similar experience, and it was the first thing that I noticed. We had been through surgery before. You never like seeing your kids hooked up to machines or anything like that. But when I walked into the room, I remember thinking, she's pink, so I know I get
yeah.
what you're
And
saying.
you think,
Yeah.
and you think when they tell you, oh, he's a blue color, and you think nothing about it,
Mhm.
or that's the way they are,
Mhm.
and then they say, oh, they'll be so pink, and you go, you don't think much about it, but it was amazing, the difference. It
And
really
it
is.
means something, it's like you see
Yeah.
people, that means that they're oxygenated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That they're working like we are, or it really is. I remember one time I had Nick in. It was cold. We'd gone to the grocery store, and I had him bundled up, and a lady at the grocery store, she says, "Woo, it sure is blue, blue." And I said, "Yeah, it's pretty cold outside," because I didn't want to go into all the, he's this color all the time, but really also closer they got to surgery, the bluer he had become. And I look back on it now, and I have a picture of him sitting with my other kids on the stairs, and he looks like a little blueberry. He does. I was looking at him the other day. There was a significant difference, at that time on his coloring. But the transplant made a world of difference. Nick's 6 feet tall. He would have never have grown that tall, and he is. He's not as thin now. He weighs more than he ever has in his life, and he weighs 155 pounds and weighs more than he ever has in his life. But my oldest one was tall and thin, and so that wasn't all that unusual. I mean, growing up, through his teen years, but we did all the usual stuff for transplants. We had to go once a week for a heart biopsy for a month, and then every 2 weeks, as long as he did not reject. Now, if he went rejected, we'd have gone more often, and then out to every 3 months, and then on out to every 6 months, and every 6 months was the best it ever got to be. And Nick it was a big deal. Nick went to school on time and rode the bus with his brothers and sisters. And I just went in and always told his teachers. And at the time, they didn't have school nurses. And when he did get a school nurse, I think about how ancient this sounds. It really does. That which is a blessing, But he a school them that he had a heart transplant. I always gave him my numbers to find me. Always tell them, if there was even the slightest question, call 911. Don't hesitate. And as good as our hospital is here in town, it was a non-care for Nick. I mean, he was always going to have to go to the children's hospital, but at least, they could get oxygen on him and that sort of stuff. And we did the typical stuff, chicken pox. Oh, good, not chicken pox. We had to be careful of it. And finally he got them. And in hindsight, I would have just gone around and said, get them somewhere. But, it was an ordeal.
The old-fashioned chickenpox party.
Yes. It was ridiculous about how chickenpox, and, we bought, I think, 2 rounds of acyclovir, at $600 a shot. For no reason. Yeah, for no reason before he got them. And but that was a big deal in the kindergarten and first grade. But
And
Nick
just
did
also
have
Also to think about back then, $600 was even more than
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And it was like, convince the insurance company that this is what you need to do,
Mhm.
kind of thing. And but I remember our insurance was there's $1 million cap, and we worried about whether or not we'd go over the $1 million. And why nowadays, I mean, we're way over $1 million. This is far out, but that was a ordeal. And if my husband changed jobs, it wasn't how much money he was making. It was how good is the insurance and when will it pick it up. And actually, for Nick's heart transplant, we did not have any insurance. It Heart transplants were considered experimental at the time. Nick was one of the first 150 children children being pediatrics under the age of 18 to be transplanted in the United States, and even smaller percentage under the age of 2. But they didn't keep the statistics that close. They just had kept the statistics under the age of 18. And if you were getting a kidney transplant, you could get help because it's cheaper to get a kidney transplant than it is to have a patient on dialysis. So but a heart transplant wasn't that way. So with the heart transplant, we had insurance up until the point Nick went into the operating room. To the operating room doors, everything was covered. Anything that happened after that, it wasn't. So that came out of our pocket, and there was some wheeling and dealing and paying just what I could along. Now, that doesn't count the in and out of the hospital for the biopsies and in and out of, every little cold and all of that sort of stuff. And those were the days of a year pre-existing condition. And so those things have changed, and that's for the good. But
and people who are in the heart world might not realize as well, like when you're going in for a biopsy, that's a cardiac catheterization every single time, right?
Yes. Well,
it's a big procedure.
It's a different procedure, but they do go through your neck and go down into your heart, and they would pinch off 5 pieces of the heart muscle and put it under a microscope to see if there was any rejection. So it's a kind of a partial heart catheterization.
A breathing tube.
Yeah. Oh, sedation. Yeah. Just like that. Yeah. I think now $32,000 maybe is what I heard from my daughter-in-law is what just the procedure part, not the hospital and not the doctor and all that. But yeah, it was very expensive, and it added up really quickly. And bills overlapped bills, and admissions overlap. Sometimes we would be back in the hospital before we'd gotten the bill for being in the hospital the week before. That kind of thing. So yeah, I spent a lot of time on the phone with the insurance and stuff. And then some days I just stuffed them in the drawer and said, hey, life's too short for this crap. I'm going to do what has to be done. And I thought always, y'all really don't want me to be on the nightly news because my cute little heart patient is going to win every single time. And, and this is the days before GoFundMe and Facebook and everything. But that was always my ace in the hole. You don't want me in the 6 o'clock news. But Nick grew and did really well. And he did have to repeat the 2nd grade. And part of that comes from having been sick as a child. And some of it also came from taking immunosuppressed medicine. It makes you not make heart memory wise, it's hard on you. So and it was ended up being the best thing that could have happened to Nick. He drove later than he drove sooner than his friends, but because they couldn't drive, he didn't get his driver's licenses early. And also by that time he kind of understood the value of life that most teenagers don't understand.
Was he nervous to
So,
drive?
I beg your pardon?
Was he nervous to drive?
Yes, he
Yeah.
was. He was. He went. The first time he drove to his biopsy in Atlanta, and we'd go at 6 in the morning, and which the traffic's pretty heavy. And well, anytime you go to Atlanta, it's heavy. But he got there, and his blood pressure was sky high.
Oh no!
The nurses cut. Why? He never has any trouble with his blood pressure. I said, he drove down here this morning. They go, oh, and that was the end of it. And I never said, hey, we need to put him on blood pressure medicine. Never said anything more. It was just like, that was the answer. And it was. And he's still, he's not one of those males that has to drive all the time. He's still perfectly happy for his wife to drive or me to drive. You know, that's not a driving, pardon the pun, that's not a driving force for him. But it really worked out because he had that extra year of maturity.
Yeah.
And he had his one and only bout of rejection he's ever had. Just a year before that, we had trouble, and I'm in tears, and I asked his cardiologist, Dr. Vincent. I said, "What is causing this?" And he said, "Hormones."
Mm.
And I told him, I said, "I got 4 teenage kids at home, and I'm at the right age for hormonal issues, and you're telling me we got hormones problems or rejection." And we did. And not only that, is it happened like he had a week before we were supposed to leave. I took the kids. I had inherited some money, and then we'd invested it well. And my kids, but just the one older than Nick is a mentally challenged child, and I knew he wasn't going to go to college, and I wasn't, frankly, sure that Nick would live to go to college. So I decided I was going to take them to Europe, and the 4 of them, and that we were going. We stayed. I swapped houses with people that lived in Europe, in Wales and in Germany. And
I think they have a movie like that.
do what now?
I said, "There's a movie about that."
Yeah. And I had decided that, we would go for the summer, and I wanted the kids to be teenagers where they were big enough to go and do for themselves and all. And we went in a school backpack. That's all we carried. And it worked out really nice. And we went all the way to Greece and all the way up to Norway and Finland.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was a great experience for all of us. And my husband did come over for a couple of weeks, and but it was nice, and the food was kind of a wash because you would have to eat here whether you did, wherever you were, mm-hmm. and a good cultural experience. But anyway, Nick had a biopsy just prior to going because I wanted to make sure, kind of like you get your car ready to go for a trip. I wanted to make everything up to snuff. Well, that's when he rejected. Mm. And they took him off of some medicine. And I said, y'all, I'm going to be gone, for 3 months. I can't just go into the local, pharmacy and pick this up. And they said, no, it'll be fine. And I told the doctors about 400 times, look, we're going to be gone. If I call, you better answer, that it'll be a big deal. And I did buy travel insurance to make sure not that just Nick could fly or I could fly, but that all the children could fly to the nearest place for him to have the best medical care. And like from Greece, it would have probably been the end of Italy, and I'd eventually made myself get back to America, or at least London would have been my ideal spot for us to go there because they had they know transplants. So, but believe it, well, thankfully, Nick had no trouble, didn't have a sniffle, didn't have even run a fever, had no issues whatsoever while we were gone. And we plotted all over the world, so on that part. But he graduated from high school on time when he was supposed to, and started college, but he started getting sickly, and when he was his first year of college, and he would lay around on the couch a lot, and he would talk about his leg or his knee hurting, and there were days I'd say, well, you've got to get up, maybe if you move around, this will get better. And this went on, and we actually went to the hospital a couple of times. And in October, I remember telling Dr. Cantor, we were down in the hospital, and I said, something is wrong. Mama's gut says something bad is wrong. And he kept having blood taken. Nothing ever showed up. All the tests never showed up anything. And so in February, I was a substitute teacher then. Nick came to my class and said, Mom, I'm having some bleeding when I go to the bathroom. And I said, well, call the doctor, call the transplant coordinator. I was slowly by that time letting him handle some of his interactions. And he had long since started taking all of his medicine by himself.
Yeah.
And but he knew what to do. And he had already been in to see his regular doctor. And they had done some blood work and stuff. But anyway, we ended up going down to the Children's Hospital, and we had to stay. And they told me all by myself again that Nick had cancer. And that's a very common thing with the type of medicine he takes. And I tell these two guys that I did not know. And I said, well, what do we need to do to fix this? And they said, well, with this kind of kid, there's not anything you can do. And that's the one thing you never want to hear from a doctor is we can't do anything. So I did call my husband and did all of that sort of stuff. And they ended up that was on a Friday, and one of the doctors wanted to tell Nick, because Nick was over 18, and my husband said, no, you're not going to go in there and tell him he has cancer unless you can confirm it. And with blood work and that sort of stuff. And my husband was right. There was no point for him to sit for a weekend and think he has cancer and wait around and find out differently. Well, they did find out differently, but it was almost as bad as the cancer. He had an aneurysm on his aorta. It was the size of a golf ball. It looked like Dr. Cantor actually took Nick and I to see it after Nick had the surgery, but it looked like the pictures of the sun where the stuff is shooting off, and that was pus and infection shooting off of his aorta, and it was this big out of a little bitty aorta like that. And long story short, Dr. Cantor wasn't sure that. He said, I do babies all day long. That's the majority is a little baby. Nobody that's an adult. So he got Dr. Chin from Emory, who does aneurysms all the time, and together they went into the operating room. But by this time, Nick had his own anesthesiologist and Dr. Miller. And Dr. Miller had put Nick to sleep for all of his biopsies and all of his surgeries. And Nick knew him. And Dr. Miller's daughter was getting married. And he said, I can't be there. I promised to my wife I would be off on Friday, Thursday and Friday. And they had in order to get Dr. Chin, they had to bump Nick's case back till Thursday. And he also had, because the infection was all through his body, he had, a permanent line in his arm. So everything, they wanted him to actually go as long as he could with the antibiotics in his body before they opened him up. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of them realized how bad the aneurysm was. And so, anyway, I said to Dr. Miller, he said, I can't be there, on Thursday. And he said, but I'm not that big of a deal. And I said, well, if you're a kid and the last person you see is somebody you know and loves you, it does matter. And, if Nick had died, the last person he would have spoken to was Dr. Miller. And that does matter. Which I probably shouldn't have said that, because lo and behold, on Thursday morning, who shows up but Dr. Miller? And I know I'm in the doghouse with his wife, because I'd had kids that were getting married. So I had to send flowers to her while Nick was in the OR. I'm on the phone with the florist, and so apologizing profusely. And so Dr. Miller, Nick makes it out. It was a 16-hour surgery, and we went to the waiting room, and it was full. And by the time we got out of there, we were the last ones by 4 or 5 hours. But they fixed his aorta, and Dr. Cantor said he did well. He said, but he actually had pus on his aorta. You could tell he had never seen anything like it that bad. Now, and this is after we had taken tests and tests and tests and done everything, and they had listened to his heart, and still, but it was because he was immunosuppressed. None of that showed up. He never ran the fever he should have had and that sort of stuff. So, he went to the ICU. All the nurses that took care of him during that stay had him as a baby, all of them except for one.
Oh my
and and all of them knew him, and I certainly knew all of them. And we went home, and he did very well, and is still continuing to do well. He did have to have a pacemaker a couple of months later, and he has since then had that pacemaker they put in a second pacemaker. He still has a pacemaker, and this pacemaker is the souped up kind. It's done on his phone. He doesn't have to send a report in. They can check on him anytime. He can read a report. It's an amazing piece of stuff. And where before you would have to, he actually had to come to our house because we still had a landline, so that he could hook up to the landline so he could send his pacemaker report in. So, but it's really cool. But anyway, here it is. Nick is 32 years old. He will be 33 April the 5th. He will have had his heart 31 years on March the 21st, which is next month, come think of it. And he is married. And he is has been a manager at Walmart, but the hours were too long for him. He found out physically he couldn't work 80 hours a week. And he doesn't want to.
I don't know many people who
would. No. And he was working. Everybody has to take it. No, this is not on Walmart. This is just, that's how it is when you manage things. You have to work more hours when things go wrong. And but Walmart's been great to him, and he's been with them for 10 years. He worked that was another thing, is I was particularly proud of him, and this is truly hindsight too. College years, he had to work harder to go to in his college because of his memory problems with the taking of the medicine and stuff. And he does he stuck with it. He wanted his degree bad enough that he stuck with it. He was sick and had to drop classes when he had the aneurysm. And but he came out and he worked full time, went to school full time, and got his degree. So he did exceptionally well there, where others might have said, "Hey, this is too hard. I'm not going to do this," you know. But I told him he needed to work for a big company, and Walmart certainly qualifies as that. And so that he could be absorbed that insurance, you know, and they've given him insurance and he's done really well. But he would be managing a store probably now if it hadn't have been for, he just said, you know, this is too much. He was working at nights, which everybody has to take a turn to do in management, working nights. Sure. But he said, you know, I could go all night and not see somebody really. Mm-hmm. And he had an episode where he's had to have some stents put in. He said, you know, I got to work where there's people around, you know, when I'm not feeling well and that sort of stuff. So, but he's done really well, and he and his dad and I were off at a basketball game yesterday. Nick and I do college basketball together. So but he's doing, you know, he said he was doing well. So, and that brings me up to today.
That's awesome.
Who yells the loudest, you or him, at the game?
I probably stood the loudest, but we're Auburn graduates, and we're #1 in the nation right now.
Oh wow!
So now we both take it pretty seriously, and you know, it's not. And now, granted, I have to do all the paying still, but you know,
I don't think that changes.
Yeah, I don't think that'll ever go away. That's a parent thing. And he asked me about 3 or 4 years ago. He said Auburn has a good basketball team, and we went to a lot of, when he was in high school, and I was substituting at the high school. We went to a lot of the basketball games together. But he said, "You want to ride down to Auburn and see basketball?" So we go to a couple a year, and sometimes more. And we went to Auburn was in the Final Four 2 or 3 years ago. But I said, you know, by the time you have a 30-year-old son, they don't ask their moms to go much, you know, with them. So it's really nice that we get to share that. And I let my husband went along just because I thought he needed to see the team play, you know. But it's usually Nick. It's usually just Nick and I. And nice. So yeah, and it's nice we still share that. And he laughed. He also told me the other day his wife tells him anytime he doesn't do what she thinks he ought to be doing for his health, and men are stubborn that way, you know. And he says, "Mama, you'll be dead 10 years and Lacey's still going to be saying, 'I'm going to call your mother,'" you know. Because he not, you know, that I will, you know, react to it and tell him, because I have to admit, I worked really hard, you know, for a lot of years, and to keep him alive and do what they told me to do and show up with him when we were supposed to. Not that my husband didn't, but I was the one that did the, you know, the going and the coming and the, you know, giving the day-to-day medicine giving and that sort of stuff. And I'm not gonna, don't do me that way now, you know, kind of thing. So.
You're like, I've been a steward of you for a very long time. Now it's your turn, and you need to take good care of what I do.
Yeah. And as a general rule, he does. The only thing that he's not good is that he, you know, I've got to go to the hospital one more time, you know, kind of attitude. you can't wait. I've never seen it get better because he waited. It's only got worse. And if you can catch it before it gets bad, you have a better chance of surviving it than you do if when it gets bad, they don't have anything they can do for you then. So I've just kind of, shake him till he catches on. And most of it, well, he catches on. Most of it is we're just lazy. You just think, I don't want to go down there again. I don't want to. He had to spend 4th of July by himself in the hospital. I don't want to do that, and I get it, but unfortunately, you were born with issues and you got to deal with them,
Yeah.
So, but he slowly learns that, and now he's got a child and he worries about his longevity. And I told him, I said, look, our society is really wrapped up in being healthy and living a long time and doing all that. And it's good. All of that is good. There's not any problem with it. But you need to live and enjoy what you have now and appreciate it and not worry about that sort of stuff, because we can all live a long time and live 10 years in a hospital bed, but that's not really living. Appreciate what you have and stay as healthy as you can, but go and do and don't live in fear and worry all the time. And I think he's doing that. But he told his wife, he said, when I'm gonna cry now, when the guy comes, make the guy come and ask you for Ava Grace's hand in marriage, because he fears that he's not going to be here for that to happen. And the chances are he probably won't. And but who knows? Outside of me, who would not contemplate differently, nobody thought he would live to be, 33 years old at any time in his whole life. And I just would not think about it or accept that it could be anything but that. Because there was nothing gained by worrying, about that. Now, that's not to say that I'm not realistic about things when it comes around or it gets bad, but I'm going to live and enjoy what I can, And I complain to him. He doesn't come to see his mom enough. And just like my mama complains, the typical stuff. And those are good things,
Go visit your mother.
Yeah.
If you're watching.
Yeah. Exactly. But I don't want him to come live with me again either, No, it's nice that he has a family and he has an interest and they travel a lot. He and his and they take Ava Grace and go and he's doing and he's living now. I think he's conscious of seeing things with Ava Grace that and doing those sort of things because of that. But that's okay too. Use the fear wisely and not against you. And I don't want it to incapacitate him, but and I told him that about the insurance and how they did, and I said, you want to the finishing school, you need to have a job and leave things where they're taken care of. His wife and daughter are taken care of and in the best shape. And since they've been married, Lacey's gotten her degree. I'm super proud of her. And I said, Lace, it may come down that you're the breadwinner, and Nick is on disability till he could get a new heart. I said, y'all need to prepare and have contingency plans. And they've done really well, I think, with that, the realistic. And I told them before they got really serious that, the facts about the chances were that Nick wouldn't. She'd be, a single mom, uh, and those sort of things. And I mean, I was very upfront because Lacey needed to know what she was getting into, and Nick did too. That he had some extra responsibilities, which my husband, who does not think in the same plane as I do on that, he says, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that," But I'm glad I did, and because they needed to go into things with their eye open, and I finished with Lacey. As awful as all that sounds, I think Nick's worth it. I'm proud I've had him, and that But you have to admit she's a brave person, and her parents are too, because Nick's not what you would want your. That's not the kind of situation you would want your child to go into, and that knowing that there would possibly there'll be heartache, but then none of us are promised tomorrow.
Right.
So, that was
Well, it's an interesting thing
part of it.
with chronic illness, or like us heart parents, is there's an interesting like juxtaposition between fear and hope, because on the one hand we have all these things that make us afraid, or there's a reality in those fear-based things, but then on the opposite end of that, we've watched odds be beaten, we've watched cures come about, we've watched, or not cures in CHD, but we've watched solutions come about that give us like such hope as well. And so it is an interesting reality to be both of those playing fields at the same time of we're scared about this, but we're hopeful about this, and we have to plan around all these unknowns.
Yeah, exactly. Well, my thing was always been, if Nick could stay alive till the medicine caught up with him, and they have come a long way with new things, and just put one foot in front of the other. But Dr. Kenner told me when Nick got a heart transplant, he said, with a heart transplant, I can promise you quality of life. And life is not living in a controlled bubble, and not just existing. I wanted Nick to grow up to be a healthy, functioning member of society. He was treated like the rest of our children. He had chores. He had to do things. He was expected to make good grades. He was expected to behave in class. And he knew his parents were not going to make excuses for him, and that he was to do the best he could do, and be the best person he could be. And I think he has turned out that to be that person, and not sheltered and treated. One lady told me one time, she said, people don't usually mind children who have problems. They mind spoiled children that have problems. And that's true, so he did really well. And I sent, Nick hadn't been home but 2 weeks after we had left the hospital, so a month after the heart transplant. And we had moved into a new house and had a big load of dirt, and it rained and it was washing down the driveway. And there is Nick sitting on his knees with mud from head to toe. And I took a picture of it, and I sent it to Dr. Kenner, and I said, "You promised Nick, quality of life. And for a 2-year-old, what is quality of life but a mud puddle?" So, with that, he really has. And, he's seen all but Alaska of the 50 states, and been to Europe, and been snow skis and water skis, and travels and goes. And he played on the tennis team in high school. He wrestled during middle school. If he was able to do it, he did it. And that was always our thing he loved football, but he couldn't play that. Well, I told him, yes, he could play football, but he had to kick. And he decided not to kick, but I wanted him. I thought he was pretty safe as being a kicker. But he was the manager for the football team and was very involved for 3 years. And so he got to participate in the way he could participate in football, and he loved that. And so anyway, I think there's ways to do things that you want to do, even when it's a little harder for you than it is for others.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Does he share your passion for writing? Like, has he ever thought about writing a book about his travels around the United States and all the trips he's been on?
No, he does not. He does not. That would be nice. He just sort of he does mostly stuff when he has to for me, like come on a Zoom thing. But no, he doesn't write. He doesn't write. In fact, none of my oldest one will write, but he only writes school papers. So, but he likes the idea that something is written about him because he wants the royalties. But that's
Oh my goodness.
yeah. So he's done that, but he did read the book. And I'm many years after I wrote it. I mean, like 4 or 5 years. And he said, I was reading along, and I go, is this kid going to make it or not? And then he said, oh, but it's me. Yeah, And I thought, that was pretty high praise for my writing because he had, it made him stop and
think to another story.
Yeah. And but he only has read like the first 2 chapters. After that, he said, I can remember all the rest of it. That kind of thing.
It's the early years.
But
and your book is
Nick's New Heart, 30 Years and Counting. Yeah. And my son-in-law read it, and the in-laws coming in to the family, they don't have anything to base any of that on either. And they had, when Nick gets sick, they don't, recently he not real sick, but I mean, he was in they don't have any way of judging how bad this is, or should I be upset, or I'm concerned. And neither did my other children up until the aneurysm issue, because Nick had never been really sick till then, and they still judge that off of how my husband and I react, and how concerned we are, and how bad it could be. But I didn't realize the dynamics of bringing in-laws into the family, that how they would judge what was going on, having a brother-in-law, like that. And my son-in-law is really soft-hearted, and my family is not particularly tender that way. Well, part of it is because we didn't have a choice. You had to man up and go on.
Right.
And I know you know what that's about. And he said, sometimes, he tells my daughter, he says, sometimes, a lot of times, things are not as bad as a heart transplant, but we still have to have sympathy for it, And so he has to remind Mary Beth to be sympathetic, and because it was very much a pick yourself up, we're going to do this for right now, and then we're going to come home and we're going to go back into real life. We can't stop and be, you can be sympathetic, but we can't stop and break down, or everything breaks down, It's, you just have to keep going and move forward, and not feel sorry for yourself too much. I feel sorry for myself when I go to bed at night by myself, if I even let myself have that little bit of a party.
Yeah. I know. And it's
Yeah.
sometimes, and you're right, though. I mean, that's what you do. You pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you just plow forward. But I remember
Yeah.
those moments of, telling my daughter, like, I'm like, okay, I'd let her break down for a minute, but then it would be, all right, tough love. We gotta, we don't
Yeah.
have, we gotta move forward. And
Yeah.
you do that, you dust off. But
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have any choice, I think,
Mhm.
with chronically ill kids. Because if you let those thoughts in too much, or you get too mired in them, then you don't get it together and move on. And it couple of statistics disturb me, but for people with chronically ill children, there's a 60% divorce rate where living if they live or die. And I got a marriage I want to have tried to hold together all these years. It'll soon be 40. In fact, this year it'll be 40 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah, and you need that significant other too. You've got to have some support. And but it also worries me that chronically ill children, 70% of them don't have any significant other,
Mm,
and they're the very group that needs to have someone else.
yeah.
And I consider it really fortunate that Nick's married and has a family, because based on those statistics, he shouldn't.
Mm,
And that and so and you need help when you're chronically ill, and you need those second sets of ears. I don't go with Nick. Lacey does, except during COVID. But I mean, you put somebody to sleep, and then they wake up and you tell them all of these orders or what's wrong with them or what's going on. They
yeah.
don't remember that. They're
Right.
half asleep still. And so, we kind of have a system, thank goodness for cell phones now,
Mhm.
that, they put me on speaker phone. And if I have questions to ask, then I can ask. And, and I know they're his doctors, but the thing is I'm the history. I'm the person that can say, look, he has a pacemaker because the two upper chambers didn't work. Otherwise, they've got to rifle through,
Right.
lots and lots of records. So,
And who's to say they'll find it? The
yeah,
information.
exactly. And so they're good. And I have questions, and Lacey asks questions, and real persistent. And Lacey and I have a really good relationship, so that allows me in that aspect. I mean, the two of us override Nick, and that's not a problem.
Mhm.
And
You guys team up. And
yeah,
he has
yeah.
a daughter. He's totally outnumbered.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and half the time he's asleep anyway. So, and stuff that they wouldn't maybe balk at, I will speak up and say something. But he told a doctor one time I was not pleased, and I won't go into that story, but I was unhappy. And the doctor um, was walking with him to the cath lab and says, I hear your mama called. And Nick says, yeah. Said, she's been doing this for over 30 years. And said, I don't take much crap about stuff.
Real
And so
growth.
that was it. Yeah, that was it. That was Nick's answer. Said, well, she's been doing this for 30 years. So, and there is a big difference between that, because most of the people that are getting transplants are, they're in their 40s and 50s years old. And when Nick goes to the clinic, or he's on the floor, he'll be the youngest person up
Yeah.
there. He's the nurses and the fellows ages, and as opposed to the next one up will be 30 years older than him, that might be admitted. And or he goes to the clinic, and the guy will say, well, when did you have your heart transplant? I had mine 5 years ago. And Nick says, oh, 30 years ago. It's like, that like, they think, well, 5 doesn't sound like too much, does it? But he's the youngest there, and all of their kids are the same age as he is, so there's a difference in that completely. And I've talked y'all's ears off the whole time.
We've enjoyed every minute of it.
No.
Y'all are sweet. Y'all are sweet. Is there any other questions or anything else?
Well, I mean, the one other thing that I would love to ask you is, I know you've written, this book, which is, in a sense, like memoir biography type.
Yes.
It shares the story, but you're also a romance writer.
I am. I wrote Nick's New Heart, and I've been playing with that since, I guess, Nick was transplanted. And, the kids were going up and I would talk about it. And I even looked about maybe taking a writing class at the local college, and it just never did pan out. And when my oldest one Nick was still in high school. He would have maybe been a sophomore in high school. A lady came to town and started a writing group, and I joined it. And because I was already kind of working on Nick's book anyway, and so I started that, and I really got into it. And all of my kids were teenagers, and they didn't want anything I cooked. They didn't want to do anything all of that. And I just
all at once. I remember.
Yeah.
Hormones.
Yeah, I just said, forget y'all. I'm gonna go do what I want. So and that worked out pretty well. So I wrote Nick's New Heart, and my mother I'd always read romance novels. I'd read Harlequins in particular, and so she had said a long time ago, she said, you need to write one. You've read so many. Well, after I wrote Nick's New Heart, I thought, well, I'm going to try my hand at that. And when the first book I wrote was about a little boy who needed a heart transplant.
Oh.
Imagine that. Yeah, they say, write what you know. And so Harlequin, I write for the medical line. And I knew, now, granted, I got a political science degree, but I knew the hospital. I knew what went on in hospital and that sort of stuff. I always tell everybody, I said, I'm not a doctor or a nurse. I don't play one on TV, but I do know a whole lot of them. So I always had, I had people I could ask if I had any questions. So they signed me for a 2-book contract. Harlequin did, and I thought, great, what am I going to write as a second book? I wrote what I knew. That was it. But I did have some friends that were doctors and nurses in Ghana, West Africa, and that was my second book. And from there, I've gone on. I have just finished my 32nd book. Have started my 33rd for Harlequin.
Wow.
But I wrote another nonfiction, which is about a World War II flight surgeon. I interviewed my great uncle, and he was flight surgeons were a really new thing in World War II. Using airplane for warfare was also. So it's about him, and I have original pictures he took during the war, letters home from to his mama. And that book is about him. And I have self-published 2 novellas and 3 books that are romances. And this year I'm going to put out another one, a romance, self-published about a hot air balloon race. And then I have another nonfiction called Daily Inspirations for the Unflappable Substitute, which are little vignettes, kind of think about like guideposts for every day for substitute teachers. And there's 180 of those. So those are the plans so far. So
I love it. Can't wait. Yeah. So what's your website? So if people want to follow you,
multitudes of websites. You can go to SusanCarlisle.com. That's for the romance. Susan C. May for Nick's New Heart and anything that's related to hearts. And on that, I have a whole bunch of links to different things that have to do with transplants and congenital heart disease. And they should be as updated as possible. So there's a good place to go get information. And then I have one for the World War II, which is a World War II Army Air Force medicine. And that has to do with the flight surgeon book. And it has some couple of really cool things. You can go to a map and it has a little airplane on it. Click on the airplane and it'll zoom out a letter that my uncle wrote home from that particular place. So it has a really nice interactive website on that. So those are places you can find me. And I'm always good for a Google. What can I say? You know?